I told you a no annual fee trifecta could go toe-to-toe with Citi and Chase, you'd probably assume there's a catch. And to be fair, there is one. But the overall math on the Wells Fargo trifecta is way better than most people realize. Because when most people think about serious trifectas, they think you need some sort of premium card in the middle, charging you $95 a year just to make the whole thing work. Chase does it, Citi does it, Amex definitely does it. Wells Fargo doesn't. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm going to break down the full 3-card setup, show you exactly where it wins, where it loses, and then run the same monthly budget through Wells Fargo, Chase, and Citi. So we can see if the setup is actually a sleeper or it's just cheap, because those are not the same things. And that's really the question with this setup. On paper, it checks a lot of the boxes. You got a 2x catch-all, solid 3x categories, access to transfer partners, and $0 in total annual fees across 3 cards. That sounds great. But as always, I don't really care about how something sounds on paper. I care if the math makes sense in real life. And if this thing can hold its own against Chase and Citi without charging you a dime, that matters. But the real question is whether its biggest weakness is small enough to work around, or if it's too big and ends up sinking the whole setup. So let's build the Wells Fargo trifecta. Look at that one gap you absolutely need to know about, and then run the numbers. And if you want to figure out how any of these trifectas work for your individual spend, I built a free credit card ROI calculator as part of my rewards and returns guide. You plug in your monthly spend by category and it tells you exactly which cards earn you the most. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. And if you enjoy credit card strategy and math breakdowns like this, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into it. But before I show you the 3 cards, you need to understand why most trifectas look better in theory than they do in real life. Because most of them have the same 2 problems. Either you've got overlap all over the place, or you've got a premium card in the middle, charging you an annual fee just to unlock the system. The Chase trifecta, you got the Sapphire Preferred at $95, then you have overlap on categories like dining. On top of that, the Freedom Unlimited is only 1.5x as a catch-all, which just isn't that excited and really not good enough nowadays. Then you got the Citi Trifecta. It's strong, but the Strata Premier is also $95, and people overstate what it actually covers all the time. It's great on restaurants, supermarkets, gas and EV charging, airfare, and hotels. That part is real. But once you move outside those lanes, the setup gets a little less clean. That's where the Wells Fargo setup really stands out. 3 cards, $0 in annual fees across the board, clean category lanes, and transfer partner access without paying extra just to turn the system on. So structurally, the thing makes a lot of sense. The question is whether that clean structure actually shows up in the math. Now it starts with the card that makes the whole floor of this setup work, and that's the Wells Fargo Active Cash. This is your clean catch-all. It gives you unlimited 2% cashback rewards on every purchase, with no categories to think about and no caps. The welcome bonus is $200 after you spend $500 in the first 3 months. Now on its own, this is just a really solid, good catch-all. It's super simple and super clean. And honestly, that's kind of the point. Not every card in a trifecta needs to be exciting. One card just needs to make sure your bad spend doesn't turn into dead spend. So anytime you're not in a bonus category, this is the card that keeps the setup respectable. But this next card is where Wells stops being just another cashback setup and starts becoming a real ecosystem. And that's the engine of this setup, the Wells Fargo Autograph. It earns 3x on restaurants, travel, gas stations, transit, streaming, and phone plans. It gives you 1x on everything else. It has $0 in annual fees, no foreign transaction fees, and the current welcome bonus is 20,000 points after 1,000 in spend in 3 months. And the most important thing is it gives you access to transfer partners. Now, if you're newer to points and miles, you might be sitting there thinking, cool, but what do I care about transfer partners? Well, transfer partners is where that cashback and points start to separate themselves. Cashback is simple, but transfer partners are where you can squeeze extra value out of that same setup if you know how to redeem. And no, Wells doesn't have the deepest transfer partner list in the game, but it has enough useful partners that this becomes more than just a 2% or 3% setup. That matters when the card unlocking all of this is still $0. So if your active cash is your floor, the autograph is the engine. This is a card that makes the whole trifecta feel legit. And then after that, you get to the card that really gives this setup its edge. And that's the Wells Fargo Attune, which is the lifestyle optimizer. This is a card that lets Wells play in the categories most other trifectas barely touch. Now Wells markets it around things like gym memberships, salons, spas, sports and recreation, public transit, and things like thrift stores. And once you dig into the category page, that's when you start seeing why people like this card, because it has some real sweet spots that a bunch of other cards just can't compete with. It also has a $0 annual fee and a welcome bonus of $100 after spending $500 in the first 3 months. And the reason I love this card isn't because it's great in any one thing, it's because the categories actually show up in your real life. Now on its own, the Attune is already a pretty interesting card, but the real value shows up when you stop looking at the cards one by one and start looking at how they fit together. Because this is the part that actually matters, where each dollar goes once the setup is fully built. So for here, dining goes on the Autograph at 3x, travel goes on the Autograph at 3x, and gas goes on the Autograph at 3x. Then you got gym and pet spend, that goes on the Attune at 4%. Public transit can go on the Attune at 4%, and if something doesn't code the way you want, you still have the Autograph to fall back to at 3x on transit. Now groceries is the obvious hole here, and that's the catch I teased earlier, but we're going to put this at 2%. Then you're going to have everything else that's also going to be 2% on the active cash. Now that's what I mean by clean lanes. Very little overlap, very little friction, and the total annual fees across 3 cards is still $0. So from a structure standpoint, this thing is clean. But a clean structure alone doesn't make it a winner. The only thing that matters now is what happens when you run it through real spend. So I'm going to be using the same monthly budget across all 3 setups, and I want to keep it simple and realistic. Dining and groceries at $400 each, transit at $100, travel at $200, gym and pet spend at $100, and everything else at $800. That's $2,000 a month or $24,000 a year. And one quick note before I run this. I'm being conservative with the issuers. If a rewards page is not crystal clear on the category, I'm not stretching it just to make the math look better. Because if this setup is only interesting in theory, none of that matters. So let's start with Wells Fargo first. Because if the math doesn't work here, none of the rest of the video even matters. For dining, you got $400 on the Autograph at 3x. That's $12 a month. For groceries, you got $400 on the active cash at 2%. That's $8 a month. Transit is at 4%. That's $4 a month. Travel is $200 at 3x. That's $6 a month. And gym and pet spend is $100 on the Attune at $4 a month. Then you got everything else on the active cash, which is $800 at $16 a month. That gives the Wells Fargo total of $50 a month or $600 a year. Now with $0 in annual fees, that net value is $600. That's a clean 2.5% return on spend if you treat it like cash back. And if you want to think about the travel upside here, using a cent per point of 1.65 cents per point, then those rewards come out to about $990 in value. Again, don't take it as law. You can absolutely redeem for better or worse than that. But this is the moment where the setup stops sounding nice and starts looking legitimate. Now Wells looks good so far, but what are the expectations for the Chase setup? I'm going to be honest, they're low. Chase is where the bar starts to move. So now let's run this trifecta. You got the Sapphire Preferred, the Freedom Unlimited, and the Freedom Flex. For dining, which is $400 on the Sapphire Preferred at 3x, that's $12 a month. Groceries is $400, mostly on the Freedom Unlimited, that's $6 a month. Transit is $100 on the Sapphire Preferred, that's $2 a month. Travel is $200 on the Sapphire Preferred, that's $4 a month. Gym and pet is $100 on the Freedom Unlimited, that's $1.50 a month. Then everything else, which is $800 on the Freedom Unlimited, that's $12 a month. So the base setup earns $37.50 a month or $450 a year. Now the flex can help, but this is exactly where people get lazy with the math. Now to be generous, I'm going to assume 1 quarter per year lines up with groceries at 5%. That gives an extra $42 a year. So now Chase is at $492 gross. Take out the $95 fee and you're at $397. Then you've got the Sapphire Preferred's 10% anniversary points bonus. But that bonus is based on spend made in the Sapphire Preferred itself, not the whole trifecta. In this example, the CSP is carrying $8,400 of annual spend, so that would be an extra 840 bonus points or $8.40. That puts Chase at roughly $405 per year in net cashback value. But if you value Chase points at just over 2 cents a piece, that lands at about $931 of travel value. And that's where Chase starts to feel a little dated in this specific comparison. And now we get to the one Wells Fargo actually has to worry about, because Citi is the one that can really push Wells Fargo to its limits here. So now let's run the Citi Trifecta, which is the Strata Premier, the Double Cash, and the Custom Cash. Dining is $400 on the Strata Premier at 3x, which is $12 a month. Groceries is $400 on the Custom Cash at 5x, which is $20 a month. Transit is $100, and this is where I'm not going to cheat the comparison. The Strata Premier doesn't broadly advertise transit at 3x categories, so I'm putting this on the Double Cash at 2x. That's another $2 a month. For travel, same thing. The Premier clearly gets 3x on air travel and other hotel purchases, but for broad generic travel bucket, I'm not going to stretch that language. So this goes on the Double Cash at 2x. That's another $4 a month. Then you got gym and pet spend at $100 on the Double Cash. That's $2 a month. and everything else, which is $800 on the double cash, which is $16 a month. That gives Citi $56 a month or $672 a year gross. Take out the $95 annual fee on the Strata Premier, and Citi lands at $577 net. So Citi is still strong, very strong. But once you stop giving Citi free credit for categories the official rewards page doesn't clearly support, it comes back to earth a little bit. And at 1.9 cents a piece for thank you point valuations, this setup comes out to about $1,182 per year in travel value. So Citi is still the travel value winner here. But it's not the runaway blowout people sometimes make it sound like. So now we got the full board laid out. And this is where the video really comes together, because the winner depends on how you define best. On a straight cashback style setup, you've got the Wells Fargo at $600, Citi at $577, and Chase at about $405. And that's the part that makes Wells really interesting, because for a setup with $0 in annual fees, it's actually winning the clean day-to-day math from a cashback setup. Now, if you switch to transfer partner value, Citi can still come out ahead, and that's not shocking. It has a premium card in the middle and has a custom cash doing a lot of heavy lifting. Plus, thank you points are really valuable, especially with the AA acquisition over the last year. But watch out for Wells, because it's a lot closer than I bet most people would expect. And it's getting there without charging you a dime just to participate. Now, that's the real story here. Wells is not the king on every spreadsheet for every spender, but for a $0 annual fee setup, the math is way more serious than most people realize. So yes, Wells is a lot more competitive than most people think, but I told you there was a catch. And here it is. It's the grocery spend category. That's the one obvious hole in the Wells Fargo trifecta. And for most households, that's not a tiny category, so you can't just ignore it and pretend it doesn't matter. The good news is this is one of the easiest weak spots to patch without blowing up the whole logic of the setup. Now, option one is the Citi Custom Cash. This is the cleanest, pure math fix. You get 5% back on your top eligible category each billing cycle, capped at $500. So for groceries, this one's hard to beat. Option two is the Saver Rewards. This is a broader, more flexible fit with its 3% back on grocery, dining, and entertainment and popular streaming services, with no annual fee. And option three is the Amex Blue Cash Every Day. It gets you 3% on US supermarkets and US gas stations, and then 3% on online retail purchases, up to $6,000 per year. So this isn't a structural disaster, it's just one missing tile on the floor. And once you fix that one hole, the Wells argument gets a lot harder to dismiss. Personally, if I wanted to patch the Wells setup as cleanly as possible, I'd probably start with the Citi Custom Cash for groceries. But even with that said, the fact that the core Wells Fargo trifecta gets this close, and in this example actually wins in the straight cashback setup, is exactly why I think it's one of the most underrated setups in the game right now. So here's the bottom line. The Wells Fargo trifecta is a legit no annual fee sleeper. If the grocery gap doesn't bother you, or you can patch it, the math becomes really strong. And if you want to run the numbers on your own spend, grab the credit card ROI calculator that I mentioned earlier in the description. It'll help you calculate all this for yourself. And if you want help building out your own custom credit card strategy based on your actual spend and goals, I launched a spend audit service. It's a custom breakdown, plus a 30-minute call, 12-month roadmap, and complete strategy session. That way me and you work together to figure out exactly what you need for your own setup. Now, if you want the best 4-card Citi setup, you gotta watch this video over here next. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.